Bored. What's this? A sequel to Harry Potter, the portrait of what looked like a large pile of ash? Why not? This could be a laugh. Let's see. Harry Potter and the Rest of the Sentence. Book 2 in the Botnik saga. Chapter 1. Hermione and his face. Harry could hear her face now, with white, shiny eyes. Uncle Vernon's goblin applauded, and Fudge shook his shaggy black hair with anger. Hermione looked up eagerly to say something. Fudge cleared his throat and said in a low voice, "Could someone do something about that memory?" "Not of the room, the door of the brain room behind them announced." "Oh," said Fudge. Harry and Hermione looked at each other in disbelief. Harry said coldly, "I could not see his face in his hands. He had forgotten the potion all over the last few hours. See where Malfoy was up at the castle?" "The earshot," he said in a low voice, still looking completely bemused. Harry clambered out of the window as he helped Hermione prepare dinner on a tray of pies. Harry felt as though he had been stupid to survive the killing curse. He fell forward into the firelight. However faint it sounded. Freedom! Harry quickly ran back to the burrow, which echoed as loudly as he could speak. Mrs. Weasley sobbed harder than ever as she strode toward Harry. Aunt Petunia looked positively little next to her. He asked her face when the cake had finally landed in the middle of the room. She said Malfoy rapidly reached for it to finish his own fake meal. Harry, who would not budge. Harry's feverish eye bloated. He will be paying much pain. Meanwhile, at the Ministry, Hermione Granger's first day stunk. Harry had taken off, and Fudge shook with rage. She cried. Okay. The goblin's invisibility cloak billowing behind him, he turned and gazed down at the sofa where Bellatrix had never thought to look. He couldn't forget his feet, or the past. Lord Voldemort. Mr. Staircase is back. Oh, God. Electo, Ron, and his magical maladies that had taken him from view. No, the goblin could not think of anything else. As for the first Dark Lord, he would be paying much pain. Suddenly, Harry was there. Or maybe that suddenly Harry was there. There are no italics in this thing. Hagrid growled at Harry's eyes and immediately began to argue at Harry about his own quivering fingers. Harry yelled Ogden at the Gryffindor, and Hagrid roared with laughter and promptly closed his eyes. His heart leapt out of his moustache, and his entire head was covered with a wave of magical firework. "The wizard is dead," said Harry. "He has been poisonous, but now he is dust." "Hermione, say something," she whispered. The portrait of the fat pile of ash of Sirius wouldn't understand. No, he didn't. Harry knew. Hermione raised her eyebrows at him. Dumbledore quietly appeared beside them. "Just passing by," he whispered, "but the knees of Harry's enemy are supposed to find Asiatic anti-smoke wizards very sick. I think that Harry should be very concerned." Dumbledore stood there for a moment, wondering how best to do it. And then he breathed air toward them and turned away and walked away. "That was impaling," bellowed the goblin. Harry had to admit that he had a very good point. He sighed, and taking a deep bite out of Hermione's head. Why is Hermione uncomestible in this series? Jesus Christ. He began tearing. I guess he's tearing at her flesh. Everyone was going to die. Everybody. And then he would pay for all the evil dark shadows beneath his misery. He would be promptly paying with much longer pain. Oh, okay, there's more. Okay. Chapter 2. Dumbledore's Beautiful Dire Feet. Draco Malfoy was up to something. He could not see his face in his hands. He had forgotten the potion over the last few hours. Is this the same shit? And reverted to desk business. No, it's different. Clearly he had a very watery plan in mind. At least Harry and his hat thought that. Harry's hat contracted with a sudden and rather unnerving twitch. Harry did not like the emphasis it put on the cloak billowing behind the goblin thief. But he did not want to let his anger spill out at it. And he did agree with him that on the other occasions, so he prepared not to care about the fact that Ron was dying from the tip down. Besides, Harry's hat contracting would only mean that Dumbledore was going back on the floor, and that was terrifying. Dumbledore, bellowed Harry Potter, the truth of the stairs began as a pair of pajamas, and got into bed. I want you to remember what form of a small voice it was. I want you to wrist banging. I want you wrist banging, and Hermione has left me affectionately. Harry is my past, present, and breakfast. It must be very lucky to be an old wizard, but now the broadcast is really getting stronger. You must. There. Harry clutched his wand at the ready, looking at him. Malfoy, spoke Dumbledore. Hepzibah! Pleasure, bellowed Dumbledore's great yellow nails as he struggled to remain upright. Harry thought that was much too late for that. Harry took a deep, worn stone and threw it up at the headmaster's head, shouting, Ogden! A few days later, several feet dragged their way to the castle, and then, without raising the rest of the class, they proceeded to burn the old man to a sudden and rather bloody death. Harry thoroughly enjoyed that. For all its pallor and weakness, he had to keep his mind on the edge of the problem, and the swishing problem was Malfoy's legs. They had to be demolished. Malfoy disliked Harry's plan. A few seconds after Voldemort's burial, Harry yelled, Ogden! But before he realized it, Malfoy sniggered and pulled out a handful of new Nimbus 2000s. The new Nimbus 2000s experienced the thrill perfectly well, and they all seemed embarrassingly delighted at Harry's Ogden. Draco Flitwick, oh dear, gasped for breath, as a silver knife fried his eyes and buried itself firmly into his shoulder, but Draco Malfoy was standing beside him, again conspicuously sniggering. Malfoy's legs were not being forcibly demolished. Hermione had seen it all. She menacingly clicked her wand, and her spectacles flashing yellow in surprise. You are Hagrid now, Malfoy. Why is everybody Hagrid now? She whispered gravely. I am lamp-like too, actually. No, seriously. I am your triumph. You love me longingly, reached Harry. Hermione gave him a clap on the back, before catching sight of Voldemort, who seemed determined to avoid Harry, seeing that he was not particularly dead. Oh dear, she said. Harry, which deflated jar did Professor Dumbledore know best? While Harry answered, the dread Voldemort quietly legged it on the back of his half-laughing centaur slave, whose half-moon spectacles looked slightly earthier than usual. Chapter 3. The Skirts of the Great Surprise. I am speaking, spoke Harry Potter, and I think we should do this in the middle of the night. Centaurs sure mean to offend, you know. I would like to speak to them, and it will be painful. But, Hermione objected, Harry, I doubt that going to the forest would be enough. You might strike the rest of them with your uncanny worms, maybe. That, said Harry, is a bit good. Very well. Hermione, you're you in a way that I never noticed I want. She was blushing, looking alarmed as she continued to flutter darkly at Harry's tartar. But Hagrid is dead. Deathstick is dead, Harry said. Professor is dead. All the same, I think it doesn't matter. Some of your people are dead too, Piers. Ghosts see what you have done. Oh, I know. That's yours, yeah. Harry looked down and picked up the mangled remains of Hufflepuff's skirts. She did not pick up. Don't you think you'd get a clear benefit from one? Hermione seemed genuinely pristine as she replied by putting the rest of the sentence at the end of the sentence and the beginning of the kitchen at the start of the sentence. I would crouch to this end, she announced with a jolt. Ah, said Harry, that is a very irritating point. And people complain that I don't ship them. No longer flooding the room, the skirts sharply vaulted back to their dormitory. But they did not belong to the castle. They hurried back up the stairs and turned into a cracked diary at him. Harry yawned. This was not remotely original. The cracked diary hastily dropped Slughorn, who absentmindedly quickened his pace and fled. It was a different plan, but it was too late. Harry said, Ogden! What the hell is the point of saying Ogden? I don't remember what Ogden is. Oh, Bob Ogden, the bloke who met the Gaunts. Okay. The assortment of objects sitting as a cracked diary hissed slightly as the train hit it in its throat. Then the whole thing, with the force of a giant snake, pounded up into the rafters, more and more rapidly until forced calm came over it, as it was essentially quite dead. Harry had to crane his neck to check, but unfortunately, it was not Draco Malfoy's. At least 30 musical saws dropped from the ceiling. Harry didn't have time to speak long before this injustice swiped away his voice, and he could not say Ogden. Oh, thank God. Hermione looked revolted as Malfoy sniggered from the ceiling and pulled himself down beside Harry. Harry, said Draco, I don't like Harry. Harry could not understand how this was happening. I am colored string? Said Mrs. Harry, who was not being asked to give an opinion. Harry really did not seem to understand how it had happened. And since I don't, Draco weakly repeated, I don't care for inflicting punishment upon you. But I don't care for inflicting any fragments of happiness on Harry either. My father will be hearing about this. Oh my God, he's even that little douchebag in here. And he will be paying, oh no, with much painful internal pulling of the death. Okay, Chapter 4. Ron Weasley's Magical Annoyance. Lord Voldemort stood between the trees, folded as a joke. He could feel Ron's sobbing soul as the pupil indignantly passed on. He called to his Death Eaters. The truth was that Ron was going to die watching his servants watering Voldemort's magical herbs. And the thought of it made him laugh. Here we are, said the cold voice of Draco the Death Eater. This graveyard was prepared for some kind of horrified delight. I hope that it will be safe. Just as Snape unrolled himself from the carpet bag, however. Hermione interrupted the Death Eaters, who looked immensely relieved. She decided to get a good look at Ron with his killers. Don't mind me, said Hermione. They didn't mind. Harry, on the other hand, thought that it was a lime floor of the telephone, and he explained what it felt like to the others. Ron muttered about his father's tank, while the librarian of the castle splattered Roberta's blood on his bedside. Harry grew steadily more bored until he couldn't stand it anymore, and he seized his hand, shouting, Ogden, oh, for fuck's sake, what's with Ogden? Ron muttered under his breath about the tank again, but it was too late. His robe snarled and then turned into steam, obliterating the boy's flailing limbs for good. There was no point in time to dwell on the pretense of helping Ron. Harry stared at the back of his hand for no reason. The Death Eaters stared at him for what seemed like hours. The hours stared at the Death Eaters for what felt like a deep attraction. Hermione drained their blood from their bags of magic for what seemed like an escalator. Finally, the very sick wizards backed away, looking terrified. Harry asked Hermione 5 questions he had been thinking about, and she swung forward, but said nothing. Smartly, Harry turned back into a chair and said nothing to the bushy hair on her face. But there was more beautiful things in this place, too. Draco Malfoy was not one of them, but he was still trying to keep talking. He coughed a few stray doxies, and then he breathed, Ogden, rise there for me. Harry sniffed tonks. Harry sniffed tonks and laughed at Malfoy's magical mischief, pointing his feet at him with similar despair. Draco's leg mysteriously became obscured by order of the great Harry Potter. Ogden raised his knife and fork and pulled every tiny spider out from under Ron's chest. But he did not help Malfoy or Harry. "But you are supposed to look like a hunchback of green nylon," said he. "You sure don't smile at Harry." Harry felt a horrible incident coming closer and closer. He whispered, "Ogden." Instantly, Ron came back to Earth and pulled every other survivor out of the way. Ogden collapsed into the goblin's grinning face. Hermione seemed to shrink into a kind of soft little black horse. And as for Draco Malfoy, his pale blue finger hunched itself at once, and he flung himself out of the nearest greenhouse window. Harry looked out at the jungle of magic and its horny, slithering presence. He sighed. The truth was that the murder of Harry's many people meant nothing. But payment would have to be seen being paid, with much pain. And there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth. Chapter 5. You're a Hagrid, Vildy. "Wait," said Lord Voldemort, who had not yet managed to get rid of them. "I am Hagrid." Harry stared into the darkness of Voldemort's magical eyeballs, and saw nothing but swirling pupils of blood. He could see that he had no alternative. But Harry knew that Hagrid couldn't be there. He was sure that the murder of the groundskeeper had been minutely completed. He was sure, because it had been committed by Harry himself, no doubt. Ron said nothing, but he didn't faint. Gilderoy said Harry took it as a reminder of the death he had just emerged from. "You're not Hagrid," Harry said finally. "Lies! I am friend Hagrid, and you are therefore about to laugh at my book of spells and hug my third cold hands. This is an order, an express order of friendly old elephant me." Lord Voldemort was getting desperate. Ron smirked. "You do realize that Harry is going to say something to you in a moment, then you will die?" asked Ron. "I don't. I am not intelligent." "I'm Hagrid, friend. Seriously. Which way back and lying?" "I don't understand what you're saying," Harry said. "Yes," he reproachfully replied. "Hagrid is our king of not being asked because he didn't be overheard or understood. I am Hagrid." Lord Voldemort produced a tail, twigs, and a couple of spiders to prove himself. Their hooves were unconvincingly fake. Realizing that he was not remotely believed, the Dark Lord Nasty reflected on the meaning of identity at the children. Looking around in a kind of horrified trance, Harry whispered to Hermione that he thought Lord Voldemort was a gash in the face of magic, and chuckled at his own stupid thing. Hermione, on the other hand, didn't feel that it was all funny. But then Lord Voldemort laughed without warning and said, "Fools! Badges spiral out of control every time. It means nothing at all. I am different, because I estimate possible ways to get dressed according to their total silence. And that's how I became a good dentist." Oh, God. Ron blinked. Hermione merely shrugged. As for Gilderoy, he had just been swallowed into a random hole in the air, from which he never returned. But Harry... Oh, Harry... Harry felt a great overreaction. Oh no, he's not going to rip his eyeballs out again, is he? He bit his fingers, staring at the place where Gilderoy should have been, and then roared in pain. "Ogden!" This was too much. Not only did Slenderman... When did he get here? But not only did Slenderman brandish a few stray doxies, not only did another somersault face its death with honor and brew polyjuice, but butterbeer poured in flood from the eyes of Harry Potter, expelling Mr. Voldemort, God, away from the others and drowning Weasley Ron didn't really care. The Weasley had just emerged from another death, and he found it difficult to gather his thoughts with inhabiting a brain. He was almost glad to be melting back into his own skeletal remains. Besides, living with Harry Potter was not entirely living. Chapter 6. There isn't one. All there was around Chapter 6 was a gorilla, a little cross, and a placidly unlikely void. For the first time ever, Harry retired to his feet and slept. Oh, that's a short one. Okay. Chapter 7. The Return of Ollivander. What happened to Chapter 6? What happened to Chapter 6? Asked the goblin. I don't snide, said Harry resentfully, but it was there before, and then it turned fruitless. I hate turning fruitless. Chapter 6 will be pain. With much pain. This is turning into a Bible. Harry crushed windows of Hagrid's hut in a huff, and looked at Hermione's magical face with a slight smile. He gazed courteously into her trumpet. Oh no, I hope that's not a euphemism. And, screwing himself into the pedestal on which they both stood, because of the gravity, he added a third kiss to her mouth, to the long list of her ill-gotten possessions. I don't ship it. You're a great Asiatic smell, said Hermione, whose mind was a gash in the darkness. I know, said Harry. I acknowledge. And your hands are of parchment, and your heart to be me treasure. Holy shit, she turned into a pirate. Harry dropped his girlfriend abruptly, looking alarmed. You're not a little pirouette pirate, are you? Oh my god! He's thinking along the same lines, he asked, concerned. I don't think so, slouchy, answered the bookish Gryffindor glum girl. The bookish Gryffindor glum girl. Don't call me that, objected the boy who lived in a pool. The boy who lived in a pool. But I like that name. I don't. Hermione isn't a quill, said Hermione. Not at all, Harry. Don't call Wizarding Wonder Harry Potter the Great and Surprising that, or I'll be sure to cast a dark curse at you. Ogden? Asked Hermione, feverish with excitement and the sound of thunderous footfalls. No, the deplorable world is too powerful to be of use disciplining lady friends. I would shatter floor, past, ceiling, present, chimney, uncle, and that's terrible. And I would have to pay. Oh God, with much pain. Their conversation about the wizarding throat, oh, there are italics in this, really was cut short. Because a balding wizard sympathetically wheezed that he would be honored to encounter them. He dashed around much faster than a snitch, which was odd for his age. Aghast, Harry yelled that he was in fact a large bag of sweet boy-who-lived flesh. The balding wizard, who had horn-rimmed glasses, seemed very interested. His centaur slave agreed. I am definitely not the Dark Lord, said the probable Dark Lord. You are definitely the Dark Lord, said Harry with a sigh so weary that a fictional camping site grew toast on its apple tree. Watch out, Applejack. You have to die. I'm a balding, whizzing wizard's magical theory. Then I suggest you remember that theory isn't possible, said Harry, grim and grimy. Dispute is not permitted. Die, tomato. Die, tomato riddle. Ogling, Ogden's a joy. The super secret variant of the yell Ogden tactic. worked on the spot. The evil tomato was covered in mud, bubbling sluggishly at the teenagers. His false beard fell off towards Madam Hooch, who didn't find it superb. A bat Scrimjaw, brusquely, convinced the goblin of Gringotts Wizarding Bank to paint a rebellion of the death of the front door of their bank. Gringotts Wizarding Bank. This drove the goblins, but not the goblin, so badly scrawled, so angry, so very, very hideous, that they revolted against the wizards. But not all wizards, just the wizard. The wizard with the balding beard and the horn-rimmed glasses and an enslaved character for a charity. They rushed at the once different inducer of anxiety, Tomato Hagrid Riddle, known as Mrs. Voldemort Smith to the public, and they killed him with an ominous fury, all according to plan. But there was something Harry, in all his wisdom, could never have foreseen. Standing in the wreckage of the fallen 50 Death Eaters, it was Ollivander. Final chapter. Chapter 8. Prophecy repeats itself. Mr. Ollivander drove his motorcycle up the stairs and turned to face Harry and Hermione. Excitedly, he said, "Jolly good. Wand imitation is just dreadful, I find. Don't you agree?" Harry knew that Ollivander's magical education was still very pale, and that he had just run a great deal of illegal wand sacks. His hysterical slurps did not speak for themselves, but Harry was clever. "What are you doing?" he asked the other. "On my third time in hours, my boy," Ollivander said mysteriously. "Only in the great black cylinder of a history wand can you know the worst is coming to a sudden resurgence." Hermione, elbowing him, said, "Harry, face him and the rest of it. Buy it, fiercely." Harry yawned ostentatiously and roared at the wandmaker. "Very well," Harry said loudly. "Here is our king. Money, spend it with distaste." Ollivander took the newspaper Harry had given him for his wand, before giving Harry the black object he had picked out, the history wand. Harry held it up to the light, as though checking for a watermark. Although he knew that his whole story would collapse with the force of the great black magic if he tried to draw it on purpose. His eyes hissed at Hermione's father. Oh no, didn't he get eaten? And he whispered, "Ogden, oh God." Immediately, serious black screeches echoed around the room of requirement, shouting prophecy. "The one who cannot save a thing he ever cared about will be given up as a bad job. The Dark Lord Voldemort's name written on a small crystal ball will be able to find that withered precious man. He shall be seen once more, and raising the empty vase up at Dumbledore. He won." That's not a mistake. He won. Maybe it was supposed to be the one. "The one who cannot save a thing he ever cared about will be given up as a bad job." Harry felt a horrible jolt. Dumbledore was no party tricks. Ron neither. Crossed, Harry tried to remember what form Voldemort owned. Many people were staring at Harry. Harry said, "Kitchen." Then realized that he had just run briskly into Snape. "Hello, Mr. Potter," said Snape. "Oh, finally, something plausible." Snape obligingly stretched out his hand to push himself back into the Gryffindor common room, calmly looking for a small crystal ball which used to fulfill the great black Silver's voice prophecy. He found the first thing he saw was a gorilla. Oh no, chapter 6 again. And refraining from yelling with enormous affection, he severed the neck of the creature. The next thing Professor Snape had was a lump of wood, under which Zacharias Smith happened to hide his mother. "Where to begin our search?" said Snape, who looked furious. "We have already," Harry confessed with a slight smile. He picked up a fistful of leaves and began to feed them blood. Meanwhile, the vampire Lavender Brown remembered what she was and immediately checked her wand. She realized that it was a small crystal ball. She knew what was coming. She wrote, "Lord Voldemort soon..." Oh, no, it's just she wrote. And then there's no quote. Oh well. She wrote. Okay. Lord Voldemort soon reached the entrance to Harry's life with a feeling of great personal satisfaction. He smelled the door of the brain room. No, certainly Harry was not sure to be in the room, but perhaps that could be delicious, for a fraction of a reason. Was he not a fraction face? He's got no nose. What do you knock off for that? An eighth? Oh, that's it. Oh, God. King Grover's court is due to commence in August. I'm so sorry. I'm bugging up my throat.